Hey, Sorasians! Welcome to the fourth episode of SORAPod. This actually is a bit of an accidental episode. So big disclaimer, we actually envisioned this episode as a submission to the American Anthropological Association annual conference. I know, it's a mouthful. The AAA conference, as we in the know call it. And so you hear us talk about an abstract, and that's what we're talking about, the initial submission of an abstract for this episode. Now, they accepted our abstract and they wanted 40 minutes. So we were like, yes, let's sit down, let's record 40 minutes. We sat down, we recorded probably 2 hours. So I edited it down to 40 minutes, but then you lose so much flavor, you lose some of the humor, and we lost out actually a lot of really pertinent and interesting things that we talk about in the larger conversation by having it just be 40 minutes. So we thought we would release the larger conversation to you folks. I have edited down some of the randomness, so you're not in for 2 hours of us talking, I promise you. But if you want to find the original 40-minute episode, that is actually on our brand new YouTube channel, which is Sora Podcast. 2 words, SORA Podcast. So that's very exciting. Also, you can find the abstract there. We will also put the abstract on our website. So if you just want to look at the abstract because, you're a weird academic nerd like we are, there it is. So a couple of sub-disclaimers, I suppose. This was recorded back in August. So it was before the current situation in Palestine. So we do reference Palestine, but it is before the current situation. So we don't make mention of that. We are obviously all in solidarity with Palestinian liberation, loud and proud. And then also the other thing is we do talk about the Montgomery boat brawl that had happened at the beginning of August. And this was recorded at the beginning of August. And we reference to one of the gentlemen as a security guard, but actually he is the co-captain of the Harriet II, and his name is Damian Pickett. So every time you hear us say security guard, think about us saying co-captain Damian Pickett instead, actually. And so with all of those disclaimers, sub-disclaimers, and everything, here is the episode. Enjoy! It's a Maureen.
Oh,
Maureen.
he's not letting me unmute. There we go. Just heels wrapped up in a blanket.
Gosh, guys, it's supposed to be August, not October.
I know. It's very cold and rainy here.
But yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
And then over here, it's been the wettest summer they've ever had. Like it's just constantly raining and cold. So I'm like, what's the nice way to say you're screwed both ways?
I don't think there's a nice way to say that. I don't think we should be peddling niceties when we're talking about climate change anyways.
Well, that's just your liberal agenda.
Yep. Speaking of
pink
agendas.
What do you say?
Her pink liberal agenda.
Is that why you like Barbie? Because it emasculates men?
Yeah, I want to emasculate all the men.
I noticed, Nantar, you added like how the Barbie movie expands this idea of community.
You laugh, but it's true.
No, I mean like I haven't seen it.
So. Yeah,
you have to see it. It's really the best movie I've ever seen. I liked it more than Star Trek.
What? Oh shit! That's major.
Yeah, I would watch it again, like next week and the week after, and I really, really, really liked it. It's nuts. It's like
great.
I also, so today, my friend, I know we need to start, sent me this thing, and she's like, send me your Barbie self or something like that. And this is something interesting, right, for me, right? Because I was like, oh, she's like, send me your Ken picture. And of course, my Ken picture is like, the only thing they got is my like gigantic nose, and they gave me a whole bunch of hair and made me look really aggressive, even though I was smiling. I was smiling in my picture, right?
That's so funny.
So it's given me like it's made me buff and it's made me like meh, angry, you know? And it did the same thing to Arthur. However, then I made myself as Barbie, and it actually looks a lot more like me. It like took away my beard and
Oh,
That does look like you.
yeah, and that's so cute. Oh my God.
so that is the extent of my Barbie.
Yeah, that's probably not what we're going to be talking about. But I mean, I think the thing is like, we're actually, well, we're probably not going to touch on the movie. We're going to talk about the kind of phenomenon around the movies, right? Which you may have seen. Like,
But we'll just bring it up. Don't stress
yes.
out.
Yeah.
All right. So what are we doing today?
So, does anyone want to like kind of start, or should I start? Or
So
You should give us your vision first.
my vision. Okay. So I re-looked at the abstract. It very much focused on our experience as PhD students, right? It talks about everything. Alexandra Zubrovka, colors, cookies, building community, etc. I think it's one of those things that we actually kind of stopped ourselves from going into too much detail in our first episode. There's a conversation to be had about like the experience of watching Barbie this summer that like is very similar to what we experienced or what we created at SOAS and solidarity. And that's it. Those are my only thoughts.
Just a lot.
I know it's got to be 40 minutes.
So I think I'm just looking over this thing right now, and I think like the key thing where that we say is sort of like in the middle where we say, um, it's with great urgency that we ask, how can resistance and endurance be created through joy and aesthetics?
Mm-hmm.
So I think as long as we keep to that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, so and we do say this, we use the cohort as like a case example,
Yeah.
right?
And I think it would be good to like contextualize it in like a very different social climate, right? 10 years later with Black Lives Matter and Me Too and like the rise of like trust-based philanthropy and mutual aid, like we are contextualizing the work that we did through a very different
Lens. It's
lens.
no longer us trying to survive our PhD. It's like, wow, we were doing something really important while we were
Mm-hmm.
trying to survive our PhD. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
Okay, so
I think a good, and this is why I really want to do the Barbie thing is because like we think about that as like 10 years ago and like it fucking confounded our entire department. And now globally, people are showing up in droves to this fucking movie wearing pink and like having a party to talk about patriarchy, to talk about generational trauma, to talk about all of these things and like in a way show solidarity in pushing back against those things, right? So like we've gone from this way of being that we didn't even understand we were doing to like now. I mean, we kind of
I
understood, but we
mean,
never really understood like the larger implications of what we were doing. We were in
yeah.
survival mode, right?
Well,
Niven
yeah.
was actually writing about Palestinians doing this, by the way.
I
Which,
mean, I think like
But did
a
he
lot of, I
recognize it
mean,
with us?
yes, this was no, he didn't
no,
recognize it with us, but it was
See,
literally the subject of his dissertation.
yeah.
yeah. But I think like a lot of us, I think like there's a way in which I think a lot of us also, so this goes back to kind of what I was saying right to Maureen earlier, where she was like, oh, it's hard, right? It's like it's one of the chicken or egg things. So I think like a lot of us already were pretty, radical in terms of like what we had done politically before, or like even just in our
Mhm.
day-to-day lives. But also like I think like in a certain way we were all sort of primed
Mhm.
to connect in this way as well, which
Yeah.
I'm not for a minute trying to say that we weren't conscious because I don't think that we were consciously being like, hey, let's create solidarity.
I
But we
think
were
that's
also
what it is, right?
but we were the kinds of people that did that
Mm-hmm.
anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through like, or at least, I mean, a lot of us did have backgrounds doing political stuff or like,
Yeah.
just stuff.
I think when I say that, like, we didn't fully understand it then, I'm not saying that we didn't understand the concept. I'm saying we didn't understand that that's what we were
We're
fully
doing.
doing because
Mm,
we were in such survival mode, right? Like, we
mm.
all talked about community, we all talked about like art and aesthetic and blah, blah, blah. But like, I don't think we fully put it together. And part of that is like we were being traumatized, we were being actively traumatized at that point. And then, um, and now we're not.
All right, everyone. Ding, ding, ding. Time to begin class.
I got too warmed.
Who's good?
Sorry.
Okay.
So,
Well, we wanted to just read that one line from the abstract so that our listeners could hear our topic. Sahil, you've
sure.
got the line.
I got the line. So, yeah. So, for this episode, we are asking how can resistance and endurance be created through joy and aesthetics? Focusing on Sora.
And I
So,
guess again, to give a little bit of context, SORA is not just a podcast, but our PhD cohort, which is how the three of us met.
And
and
should
it is
we?
open to anyone who would like to join.
Yeah.
That's right.
Now,
So,
SORA is worldwide.
so let's talk a little bit about the circumstances with which we began imagining this abstract. I mean, what we described in our abstract.
Right. So, I mean, I guess, we talked about this in the first episode, so we won't go into too much detail, but really, you know, I guess we were just talking about this, right? Like how, facing certain difficulties, control trauma by our department, we really came together in an act of solidarity as a cohort from being really atomized and not knowing that others are going through the same experience to realizing, hey, we're all in this together and finding kind of various ways to fight back, for lack of a better term. Um, that included lots of fun things. Help me out, guys.
It wasn't just fighting back. It was kind of like to keep
It was
on going on.
protection, right? It was like
Right.
we were trying to protect ourselves and protect each other and be support.
Self-motivate.
True.
Like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because our only other option was to lay down and die, right? So seriously.
Which I
So
feel
we
like there
were
are
just
pictures of all of us in that state. Just like I'm not ready
Very
to get
true.
up and do human things today.
Very
yeah,
true.
I remember I posted as my Facebook profile that picture from Edward Gorey. It's the Edward died of ennui, and it's just like this hand of a person reaching up, having drowned from up inside of a bog. And I was like, this is the PhD.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We were all going
Yes.
through it. And I think it like brought out a lot of like weird creative impulses that we maybe didn't like work on just then, but I think as time has gone by, we've all like kind of come back to that space and like tried to like tap into that. I mean, this podcast is one of them, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Let's talk about those creative impulses. Like we wrote that, you and I mean Nayantara and Maureen, for people who can't see us, we wrote this one sentence long description of each of the adventures of each of the members of the cohort.
It's sort of, yes, because it was sort of based on that Edward Gorey book, the I forget what it's called, but it's like an alphabet
ABC.
book.
the alphabet,
Yes.
yeah.
It's called like the Tinicum something like that, I think. And so it's like little couplets, rhyming couplets for
Yes.
each letter. And we did that for every person in the original Sora, which was our PhD cohort. And I found it one day and I thought I put it somewhere safe and I cannot find it again, which is very sad. But it was so good. I remember like I read it again just like a few years ago and it was so good. We were so creative.
And then you wrote your entire romance novel.
I did, and I can't believe I forgot that because we refound it
Ooh.
just like last month. We should
And
publish that.
Explain what the romance novel was. This romance between a fictional cohort member who manifest in various ways, but she remained fictional, and a
Professor
Sure,
in
that's
our department. Yes.
in our department, but their romance was sort of built on the act of writing. And so it was very much a meditation on like all the feelings that she had in her romantic feelings towards in her affair with the professor was really sort of her feelings about her dissertation. So yeah,
And there was also a song that I wrote to go
Yes.
with Nayantara's novella.
Romance.
Yeah.
Series of
There
short
were
stories?
definitely three
Collection of
chapters.
short stories, let's say. That sounds much better.
they were
But
more like
also,
chapters.
yeah.
Don't take this
Like
away
a
from me.
serial. It was a serial because we were sending them out to each other. We're like, oh no, not another episode of this crazy story.
Well, because now looking back on it, they were very romantically charged, shall I say? And I'm really
Yes,
proud that I could write like that.
I am too.
I
I
don't
mean, I
know
think,
if I would be able to now.
but I think that's also, I know for all three of us, but definitely for other people in the cohort, and we've discussed this amongst ourselves, but like our writing was something that we were consistently being pushed back on.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
wasn't, and surprisingly, Maureen and I think in some ways we're, similar about what we write, but we also have very different writing styles. And our advisor was telling both of us that that our style was not correct. And because we were incorporating different things, writing in different ways, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
like actually when I think about like, this idea of like joy and creativity, one of the things that really stuck out to me was I completely thought I don't know how to write anymore because I was consistently just being broken down. And there are two instances where two different people, like all they did was they sat down and they like read something I wrote and they're like, this is beautiful. You wrote this really well. And it was just like that kind of expression of,
Mm-hmm.
they said it in this really joyful way to kind of be like, you should be happy about what you wrote.
Right.
So I mean, I think it wasn't just our own creativity, but it was also that like finding like reflecting that back to each other in a,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which I think we didn't get.
And I think
Yeah.
we needed writing because our intellectual and creative labor was so like unsupported yet overstructured. It was so bureaucratized.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we needed like these other creative outlets for writing. And so I think a lot of that was going on as well. But
Mm-hmm.
that writing also it didn't stay on the page.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were reading these stories out loud to each other.
Yes.
We were writing them together. We were like cackling about them in the middle of the night.
Yes.
We were like um
Well, like even these Blank and Alexandra stories. I'm not going to say the professor's name, but Blank and Alexandra stories. We would come up with like like in between stories while we were just kind of chatting and having a coffee and oh, I'll bet they're doing this and blah blah blah. And we'd improv. We were, Maureen, you and I were kind of talking about this, but like improv and play and banter and how we talk to each other and connect with each other. And we really dove into each other's kind of imaginative space, which I think for me, one of the really important parts about this is if we had not sort of built this space to do that, and we had not all bought into this idea that this was like the space that we're going to support each other and show care, we would not have been able to be on the same page because there's no way that all of our play, all of our imagination, all of our creativity would have looked or even intersected with each other. Do you know what I mean? Like there were people with very different sensibilities. There were people with very different ways of approaching these things. And I don't, I'm not definitely not going to call anyone out. But I can I could say names and bleep them. Should I do that?
If it helps you talk, go for it.
Yeah, like there's no way I would be part of this in the way that like if we had just met and I was like, oh, we're gonna do imaginative things together. There's no way that we would have been on the same page, but we like fostered a thing where we all just sort of like we both decided we are going to be on the same page. And I think that's what's really important here.
Yeah.
The other thing we did was we fostered a space. Okay, so through creating this imaginary cohort member who took on a life of her own because she had her own Facebook page and her own email address, and she would like pop up and send people birthday cakes and things like that.
Well,
like because of all that, people weren't engaging but still engage. Like somebody could say like, I don't deal with Alexandra Zubrovka. I don't even like her. That's Maureen and Nayantara's thing. But secretly, they could go and use the Facebook page and use the email address. And that was also part of the game. So they were able to kind of disguise themselves. And that allowed the people that wouldn't normally play to play with us.
Well, and I think that because I'm going to just expand on the conceit of Alexandra Zubrovka a little bit, is that she wasn't someone's imaginary friend. She was a collective. She was a space of collectivism, right?
She was an individual.
She was a individual. So she would pop up in people's field sites. She was knowledgeable about everyone's research. She was on all the email threads as we were passing chapters around, right? Like Alexandra Zubrovka was.
We started citing her. We all started citing her.
We all started citing her as well. Yes. So we were all part of building her, and we were all part of inhabiting her, and we were all part of interacting with her, and which is like different sort of from like having an imaginary friend, right? We had this like collective imaginary friend.
Yeah.
Or was this the personification of our collective imaginary?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It was our herd. She was a manifestation of our herd. But I think sometimes, I don't know why this is the image I have in my head about our cohort, but it's always a herd of zebras, right? Like very patterned, and it's the way that we like kept ourselves safe, right? Like they're all kind of different. Every zebra has different stripes, but like together they just ended up being enough to protect themselves, right? Because they were no longer individual zebras. That's what it is, that predators can't see them individually. That's just what comes to mind.
I never really thought about zebra herds, but we'll go with it. I was thinking that like it wasn't. I mean, we had the imagination of Alexandra Zubrovka, and then we had these fun creative exercises that we did. But do you remember that time we had a party at your house, and I don't even know how it got started, but somehow two cohort members started discussing taking the subway and how people would sit on the subway. I just remember I wandered into the kitchen and people were miming sitting on the subway in the kitchen.
That's very funny.
They were getting off and on and sitting up and down, and then they were trying out different methods, and it became this whole thing. And that was sort of the moment that I was like, this cohort likes theater, like because it was easier. Sometimes it was easier to imagine something out or to play it out than it would be to write it. Like, how would you describe somebody sitting on the subway in writing? I mean, we obviously could if we had to, but it was so much easier to have that conversation with a bit of theater. Plus, it was so fun. I mean, I just wandered into it and didn't know what was going on. And then I became so intrigued. It stayed with me for like all these years.
Aww. I don't remember this, but I know that like I get in a weird headspace when I'm hosting, so I probably wasn't paying attention to your shenanigans.
And actually, I remember I know that we were going from where I lived in Bethnal Green to your house, Nayantara, with a number of people,
Mm-hmm.
and actually it was on I was gonna it was on the whatever the district line or something, and for some reason we were transporting a rolling chair.
I'll tell you exactly why. That was the thing that came to my mind as well. Someone was getting rid of a rolling chair for free, or it was like £5 or something in Bethnal Green. And so I went up there, and obviously I don't have money for a taxi. So I said, hey, do you want to help me transport this all the way from one end of London to the other end of London?
Where was I?
Potentially in Ohio.
Oh,
But
okay, keep
no,
going.
no, this would have been the first year because I was living in Bethnal Green, so it would have been the first year. I have
I was at Lillian and Penson then.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I have a memory that we met up with you later that night at Nine Towers, and I think and me and Nine
Yes.
were taking the underground from or the
With
district
the
line
rolling chair?
With the
with a rolling
rolling
chair.
chair.
What did the other people on the metro think?
So this is what I was gonna say. So we were a group with this rolling chair, and I remember, I was like, okay, there are not that many seats, so I will just sit on this rolling chair. And Nyantar, of course, was like, yeah, that makes total sense. And was sort of like, for a second, like, I'm just not gonna do it. Of course, it was just like, no, this is like, what are you doing? And I remember there's this little girl who like was looking at me both with like kind of wonder and desire, but also with like incredulence and like horror. Um, and I was like, but then, it started like kind of what, Nine and Maureen, maybe you were talking about how like there was that space for people to say, oh, no, no, I don't want to engage with Zabrovka. But then, opening up that space and letting people be in it allowed for them to engage in it in their own way. And by the end of the ride, each one of us had sat on this rolling chair because like, it started off with, being like, okay, I'm just going to sit on this chair. And Nine was like, yeah, that makes total sense because, there's a chair.
It's like the train is moving. It's also rolling around. So
And it's fun.
you're holding onto the poles on the subway, just like rolling around in this rolling chair. And
And
everyone, like, but even the other
just
people
for
on
our
the
listeners,
subway.
like it was in a space where it could be contained. It wasn't like we were just rolling up and down the car and hurting people.
No. It was definitely like just a little bit, like
Yeah,
right around where we were sitting.
yeah.
But like, other people also smiled as they walked by, right? Like, which also is nice. It's nice to bring a little bit of joy into a really dreary space. And the London Tube is like a really dreary space. We have pictures, so I'll post them when we post this on the public or on our website. I will post the pictures of I think just Sahil in the chair.
So I love this example. I'm so jealous that I wasn't part of this little adventure. But I love this example because it so basically what you needed to like there was something utilitarian about
Mm-hmm.
what you needed to do. You needed to get a chair from one place to another. So you could have just done that, but then play happened along the way because why not?
Mm-hmm.
So and then the play sort of began, let's say, incidentally, like you weren't like, I'm going to play right now. It
Mm-hmm.
just happened. And then people who weren't at all in spaces, you sort of got involved too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just crystallizes exactly what we're talking about. And then the result was it changed the larger space.
Mm-hmm. Yes, actually, yes.
So like Sahil has a memory of sort of a connection with the little girl, and you have a memory of people smiling at you. So there were connections made that would not have otherwise been
Mm-hmm.
made because if it was a normal metro ride, you
Mm-hmm.
would have just pretended like there was no one else on the metro with them.
Yeah. I mean, there were people who would like, walk by and kind of make a little comment, not snide, but just like, what are you doing? you know? Or that looks like fun. Everyone sort of acknowledged the play, which I think it's interesting because so that was like a decade ago. And I think we're sort of in a context or a time now where people are more talking about play as adults and play in the everyday. And possibly it's like a generational shift, right? Like I'm a millennial, which apparently you guys are not. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah.
And it feels like a generational shift as, us millennials are in our 30s and 40s. We're incorporating fun and aesthetics and play into how we engage in our everyday lives, right? You see it with like a lot of these home decorating trends of like maximalism and like kind of fun poppy colors and that millennial pink that was around everywhere. That very expensive mirror, that like weird wavy mirror that everyone's got.
Yeah, we didn't say our color. Our color today is pink.
Oh my gosh, yes, our color today is pink. I'm wearing a pink dress with flowers on it and pink sparkly Crocs, which I just got and I love.
I've got a pink and purple striped jumper.
I have a tie-dye shirt which has a very prominent pink stripe.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Also,
my pink shirt is in the laundry.
Oh no.
also, dear listeners, you are missing this ongoing scene of Sahil wrapping and unwrapping himself in a blanket. And in doing so, he's making all kinds of various garbs for himself. We are not laughing. We're just ignoring him.
Sorry, it's just it gets too hot and then it gets cold.
But let's go back. Sorry, we just had to interrupt for a minute for the color announcement.
Well, we can then we can also talk about colors, right?
Yeah.
This is well, I guess this was the second step. Color was sort of our second step in creating Sora. The first step was just cookies or food, snacks, bringing snacks for each other, right? Like that is such a way of showing care.
I kind of thought color was the first one.
Well, it wasn't. It was because I would stress bake on a Sunday and we would have our sessions on Monday. So I'd stress bake and bring whatever I was baking into the session. And that's kind of what, that was like the first thing, even though we weren't really organizing around it.
Right.
The color was the first sort of official organizing around. But you're not taking the snacks away from me. I started this.
And we also started going out to eat as a cohort. Kind of.
Yeah.
We get we're anthropologists. We know that most social relationships happen over food.
Yeah.
But since I'm the teacher here, we are running out of time on this topic. Shaking my finger at you. Let's go back to where Nayantara was. She was talking about now. And we'll relate the now to then.
Okay.
And you can start with the colors there.
Okay. Colors now. So I did make a disclaimer at the beginning that we are recording this in August, which means just a few weeks ago, Barbenheimer happened. And that is both Barbie and Oppenheimer open on the same day. And it was like a big deal. So I went with my friend. We did Barbenheimer. I'm not a Chris Nolan fan. I'm also not a movie about troubled men who actually do shitty things fan. So whatever. But Barbie was great. I knew Barbie was going to be great. The directing, writing duo was awesome. Anyways, the experience of watching Barbie separately, even from the movie itself, was truly, I think it's what people keep going back to. It is the experience of watching Barbie because everyone in the theater was wearing shades of pink or like, I saw people with like the t-shirts that said Barbie on them and like mothers and daughters were coming and everyone was in like their pink garb that created this atmosphere in the theater of that same sort of space of community and care. And as people were walking into the theater, they were saying, "Hey, Barbie." And then people in the theater would respond, "Hey, Barbie," because that's from the trailer. Everyone sort of had heard it. So because it was shown, like because people could show that they were here for the experience by wearing like pink and fun things and all of that. It like allowed everyone to sort of start to engage in this space and start building out this space. And yeah, it was a space for whatever it was, 2 hours, whatever the runtime was, but it was a really supportive space. At one point during the movie, they accidentally turned the lights on at a very emotional point, and I think everyone thought we were supposed to look around because that was when a bunch of people were crying. So like everyone thought, oh, this is we're supposed to see all of our fellow, women crying at this place. That's why the lights have come out. But it was actually just an accident. But it was it was just such a space of support. And it struck me that this is what we had done by instituting colors back 10 years ago when we were a PhD cohort, that we all showed up in the same color as a signal to each other that we were a safe place. And that's what I really love about this Barbie movie. And I will say, one of the things that I'm really enjoying about everything that's going on with the Barbie movie is that it wasn't just for opening day that everyone wore pink. People are going to see this movie multiple times going weeks later, and they're still wearing pink to the Barbie movie because it's now part of that experience of creating a safe and supportive space.
And I went to see it because Nayantara told me it was amazing, and I was like, whatever, I'm gonna go. And I went to a small art house theater, and where like you can eat and drink inside the properly eat and drink inside of the theater. And they had taken those, the cheap plastic tablecloths that you can get for parties.
Mm-hmm.
So they had taken pink ones of those and stapled them to all the walls so that everything was pink. And then hand built out of cardboard a Barbie box that you can stand in. And then just like glittery decorated the whole bar.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they didn't have to do that. They chose to do that. And they weren't being told by, whoever's selling Barbie stuff to do it that way because they did it themselves.
Right.
And I think that also is sort of what was going on too, because we were showing up in colors for the cohort, but there was more to it. There were these small games that we played, like passing stuff during our seminar. Like in the beginning we were passing food around, but after a point, like if we didn't have food to pass, we just would start passing a pencil around. I mean, we didn't care. It was just a small game that was happening while the bigger event was happening. I think that's also a very important element of what was going on back then.
This is so interesting. I mean, full disclosure, I have not seen the Barbie movie yet. I would like to. I just sort of have been living under a rock for a long time. But it's really interesting listening to both of you talk about it because, like, it is making me think of ethnography of Muharram, and which is like a huge, like mourning, maybe ritual, but it's exactly, there's, and I'm sure, for other rituals as well, it's about like, all of these things always focus on like that emergent space of like, you know, sharing through color and emotion, but and also food. And it's interesting only because, you might say, okay, well, Barbie's this like really feel good film, and maybe, like something like Muharram, which is focused on like the martyrdom of a saint, of a prophet's whatever family. Um, that's like mourning, but actually like there's this also, which people are like often this like joy that comes from that release, and afterwards, the sharing of the food and these little like things that are happening contemporaneously to the main event. And yeah, so
I mean, during the Gezi Park protests in Istanbul, and I forget what year that was. I'm sorry, guys. I remember, I mean, they had all kinds of things going on in Istanbul, all kinds of little protests, but the protests in the beginning were built on kind of theater and art. Like they had Standing Man, who was just standing there, and standing in Turkish is diren, and it's the same word they use for resistance. So they were #diren, #standing. So he was standing. So, that wasn't lost on the viewer. And then the birds came and they sat on him because he was standing still for so long. And then there was this one picture where the birds had lined up beside them, and people were like, look, the birds are resisting. And what was happening sort of in the in the way that like an actual physical event happened. A man was standing there, and then a social media event happened, which took on a life of its own, where
Mhm.
this image, nobody knows why, really knows why the guy was standing there, but the image became an image of resistance. And then the birds definitely weren't, purposefully resisting, but they somehow joined, you know?
I mean, they might be. The orcas are resisting. I feel like these animals are.
It's very true. I think I think that's what exactly what we're talking about is that these sort of multiple layers um, of how solidarity and resistance and actually conversation, nonverbal, like visual, symbolic conversation happens
Mhm.
um, right there. And the whole reason I brought that up was I meant to tie it to Ramadan because they also did, they had Ramadan dinners and they lined up the tablecloths, like they were sitting on the ground along the railroad or the metro tracks and just sat. And it was this just beautiful scene after, people gassing the street and people running. Like there was all that. And then in the evening, it was like everyone sat down together, but outside in public in these incredibly long lines.
Mhm.
That's what came
Nice.
into my mind.
That's what we should have done. We should have had sit-ins. Actually, people were, right? Like LSE, they were like occupying the administrative building and stuff.
When we were there,
I
we
think
weren't.
so.
We weren't at LSE. We were at SOAS, but
So, yeah.
No,
well,
there was demonstrations for the cleaners, remember?
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
my
it was
supervisor
also
was organizing that stuff, and it was like, that's crazy. You're so full of
And
violence.
so I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about like kind of what we're seeing now in terms of solidarity and resistance, and then how what we were doing then fits with it or
Hmm.
doesn't.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I actually don't know a lot of this part of his work, but David Graeber does work on like resistance and carnival, right? So I actually don't know anything about it. So listener,
Well,
go read.
but I
Um,
mean, like, oh, sorry.
oh no, I was just gonna say, like, I work with a lot of mostly like BIPOC, marginalized, progressive nonprofits, and a lot of those values now are around joy and like joyful community and solidarity, and doing this work with like kindness and doing this work in a way that is beautiful and brings happiness and brings joy. I'm going to use that word again. um and I feel like it's now so like mainstream, like we can talk to large philanthropic organizations and they understand the importance of that. They might not always fund it. But it is becoming part of like a mainstream conversation around uh resistance work, right? um Obviously I'm like very enmeshed in that world now, so like all of my knowledge is coming from there or Instagram. So
Yeah.
I can't really speak to anything else. But it is different from being in nonprofits 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Um
Yeah. And I was gonna say, like, when you're mentioning that, Maureen, like similar to Nine Tower, like I think that there is a shift, and I'm not speaking necessarily from a professional place, but like, if I think about, I'm connected to a lot of like artists or mostly, minority, uh, POC people, and now like increasingly like younger, which I don't always realize that they don't see me as the same age, but they are younger. But what I think about, like, yeah, when we were doing the PhD, there was so much around the hustle,
mhm,
right? Like a lot of this discussion was like, how do you hustle? How do you monetize? How do you
mhm,
I'm thinking, the early 2010s, and maybe that's always been there to some extent. And at some point when I quit my job at the university, people were like, "Oh, you can turn your art into like, turn your Instagram into like a money thing." I was like, "No, no, this is like the one area that I don't feel any pressure and I don't want
Mm.
this to be. But like I've noticed just in the last 2 years or maybe since the pandemic, I don't know if it's, like because of the pandemic or something that happened, like one, a lot of talk around chronic illness, which yeah, I know several of us face in
Hmm.
different ways, but like, and maybe it's also because I'm now connected to them because of other reasons, but there's, especially with these younger artists who are coming from maybe less advantaged backgrounds, there's like this very open discussion of like using rest
Hmm.
as the point around which you build yourself and using rest as resistance.
Yep.
So, and as a result of that, a recognition that the system doesn't allow you to rest. It is about the hustle. It is about,
Hmm.
but then, so people through either, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, Instagram reels and stuff saying like, hey, come and like let's all nap at my
Yeah.
place, or like, if you need a space to just zone out, like you can use, I'm not going to be in my apartment from whatever.
Right.
Rather than, I think like years ago, and I still see it, right? People are like, hey, I'm out of town, I'm looking to rent my place, anyone, like, and so I think there's certain ways in which like it's not necessarily joy always. I mean, people really highlight that, especially in like, kind of queer circles, but rest I see much more around people saying use rest as resistance to, the sort of like the capitalist grind or whatever.
Yeah. Shout out to the Not Ministry. Do you follow them on Instagram?
Mm.
You should. I don't remember her name, but she has like a really cool book about like rest as a resistance. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
I'm really bad with names. So check out the Nap
I'll check
Ministry.
them out.
Yeah.
What's it called, sir?
The Nap Ministry.
Nap Ministry.
Yeah. I mean, that's so true, right? Like it's all, I think, being more interconnected than it was when we were doing our PhDs, right? Um, it, did someone whisper something?
No,
Oh, I thought I heard
it
Sora.
was Alexandra.
It probably was. No, but like it's all being spoken about as much more interconnected, right? Like taking time off. Like when you are offline, putting boundaries around your work, putting boundaries around your mental and emotional space, equity in pay, right? Like the conversations people are having now about what they expect to be paid compared to what they were like 10 years ago, like are completely different. I think COVID and the pandemic really helped push things along like a lot. But we were always told that if we are getting underpaid, it's because you are getting underpaid. This is a you problem. This is a singular problem. This is you went into the wrong field. You don't work well enough. You picked the wrong employer. And so that's where like hustling comes into place, right? Like it's interesting. I think just the last year or two, sort of at the tail end of, well, the tail end, quote unquote, of the pandemic, there were all those Squarespace commercials. I don't know if you guys have seen these. Squarespace, like build your own website. We built our own website on Squarespace. I do actually love them, but the commercials were. Mm. And the whole conceit was you work 9 to 5, but what do you do with your 5 to 9? So, like,
Hmm.
what do you do after hours? Well, you have a hobby, you like doing a service, you like, you know, creating things, build a website to monetize that because you have to, right? And that was, I think it didn't do very well because it was like at the wrong time. If that commercial had come out like 10 years ago, which Squarespace commercials were always about monetizing your hobby, monetizing the thing that you enjoy doing on the side. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
it worked 10 years ago. It's not working now because I mean they've actually changed tack. They realize that's like not the way to go anymore because no one wants to monetize their hobby. They don't want to monetize the thing that brings them pleasure because pleasure in capitalism is no longer pleasure.
What you guys are saying is making me think about like taking up space, which I didn't really realize was a form of resistance until one day Nayantara and I were talking about two customers who had come in the store, and I was working in a little Turkish shop at the time, and I'd offered them a cup of coffee, as is the tradition. And they just really settled into the shop. And they were people of color. And I was just saying to Nayantara, like, I think it's so interesting how when I offer coffee to people of color, it kind of plays out differently than when I offer coffee to white people. And Nayantara said, well, that's taking up space. And I thought about it, and later I came back to her and I was like, I had seen a meme and I said, you mean this kind of taking up space? And she's like, yeah. And then I was like, oh, resistance, like resistance to structural systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think um, that's sort of what we're getting at here, or what we're skirting around. Because you can take up space by napping, you can take up space through colors, you can take up space just by existing where you're not supposed to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think and you can't take up space by being like, well, you can take up space by being still and silent, but like it's more about being you in the space, or creating the space in which you can be you.
I think the difference is you can't inactive versus active, right? You can be still and silent and active. You can be still and silent and inactive,
There
right?
you go. Yeah, that makes sense. So, like, I think that's what we're talking about here, because the question isn't just about how people resist, but how they create solidarity and kind of a community of resistance. So maybe that's what we're talking about, is taking up space.
That feels like what we're talking about. I don't want to talk about this on the podcast. I will cut this out. But it sounds like, did you guys see that like Montgomery, Alabama brawl that happened like
Well,
this
I
weekend?
haven't watched it. I saw something referencing it in a news thing, but I have no idea what it is.
Just to give you, like, this is taking up space and resistance and all of these things kind of combined. So these white folks who were on their little boat pulled into a dock, and they were getting out, and they had been on the lake or whatever river, and they were just drunk. The security guard, who's a black guy, came over and said, you guys need to move because we have this like very large vessel that like is like a river pleasure cruise kind of thing, is coming into dock. This is where they dock. So you guys have to move. These like drunk white people like threw punches. And the security guard like throws his hat in the air, I'm not quite sure, and starts like fighting back. Now, everyone on the dock, everyone who's like on that other boat that's like waiting to dock there, all black folks. And like they all just descend on this group of white guys who are trying to beat the shit out of this one black security guard just doing his job. Like people were jumping off the boat, swimming over to the dock and getting up and throwing punches. It's very funny. And it feels very cathartic. Right. I don't normally condone violence, and it gets real violent. But like everyone is feeling a catharsis through it, and like it's really making ripples through like a lot of black social media, because also that boat that was like to come in, it is called the Harriet Tubman. And so it's like the Harriet Tubman, and that is actually a dock where slave ships used to come through, and that dock is where people were like auctioned off, right?
Oh
So
my
it
God.
has this like very potent, very deep history.
Oh my God.
Like it just, yeah, it is I don't normally get so much joy out of violence, but it like makes me smile, obviously.
But why do you want to cut this out of the podcast?
Yeah.
Because it seems like it should be here.
I mean,
just think,
okay.
like,
So let's talk about it some more. Like, what are you thinking? What are you worried about?
What I'm worried, it's very violent, and it's, I think, well, for AAA, which is very white and very genteel and very center. I don't know.
but we're
I
also
think
doing this
black
not.
people in AAA might come around and
Yeah, and also, I mean, like the AAA also is voting
profile
to
you.
like boycott Israel, and like, I mean, I don't know. I think we should keep it.
Okay. Well, I'll take out the part where I say shit about AAA then.
But I love saying shit about AAA.
You know, they had a Facebook post yesterday that was like, did you know that Adidas had hired an anthropologist to like figure out what kind of clothes people wanted for athleisure wear, and that's how Adidas like invented athleisure wear, you could use your anthropology degree to get a job. And like all the comments were like, yes, this is why I got into anthropology, for capitalism. Like what the fuck? And I was gonna tag you, and I think I fell asleep actually.
Aw.
Um, it's not unrelated, but like Nantaro, what you're saying about like standing and being active, it made me think about a story that an acquaintance, acquaintance, yeah. I mean, like we only know each other virtually, so like
Oh, okay.
yeah. But they told me a story recently about traveling to Germany, and they're you know black mixed race, and um and it was about so they were flying from the UK to Germany on like some budget airline, and it was at the beginning of the summer, and so there was a group of like young black boys or young men. He said boys. I don't know how old they were, but I think they were in school, so probably boys. But
Boys.
and they were just having a great time, laughing, whatever, and they um got to the airport in Germany, and they had an onward flight that they'd missed because the flight was delayed, as always happens in London. And they were having and my friend's flight was also delayed, and so they were waiting in line to go to the desk to be like, all right, let's figure out the connecting flight. And these three kids are having this conversation amongst themselves of who's going to go and talk to the person at the desk. And their concerns were like, well, you sound the most polite.
Mm.
Well, you have the nicest voice. So it's like all of that tone policing stuff that where you have to,
Mm.
as especially as a black person, especially in
Black
these, like,
boy.
yeah, as a black boy, like in these like official areas, like how are you going to like control for the violence that is just structurally present,
Mhm.
you know, and he's just observing this, and or sorry, they're just observing this, and like these boys go up to the counter, and my friend said that when they went up, there was a black kind of like person who works at the airport who had been watching these kids in
Mhm.
line,
Mhm.
and so like someone who works at the airport, and he just went and stood with them,
Mhm.
not saying anything, but just
Mhm.
stood with them while they were having that conversation. And he was this friend was telling me the story like with regards to, isn't this like this is like a really great act
Mhm.
of solidarity. And I was like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it, I'm like, it is. I mean, and what you were saying, and Morgan was talking about it as well, like you can be present and standing, you can be inactive but active
Mhm.
in that way, or you can
Be
be
still and active.
being still and active, yeah.
Yeah.
And but the thing I was thinking was like, what has this person also in their life, this person who's just standing there, experienced that they know, I need to be here. I need to be
Yeah.
here because maybe that person at the other side of the counter, I know that they are racist, that they
Mhm.
are mean, that they're whatever. Then, or it's just like, I don't know that, but still, these are black boys in Europe who will have a certain experience. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah.
I think, and again, it's that kind of nobody asked this gentleman to show up for them, right? They
Mhm.
didn't even know he existed, but it's that kind of, going back to that thing of like creating that space that sort of then, you know, through not necessarily, being very active in a physical sense, allows for solidarity and support.
Yeah. No, that's so true. I mean, I keep coming back actually to this brawl. Um, and just to like tie it back in, I think a little bit to aesthetics and joy as well, right? And solidarity is what I'm seeing on social media is not just like, hey, look at this fight, look how violent it is. But like Black creators have created like TikTok filters where it's like, which folding chair are you? And it's making people laugh, or like this some woman has already like this Black woman has already created um baseball caps with folding chairs embroidered on the front of them. And the best part is, like, I don't know if you've also been hearing about this like controversy around that country song, Try That in a Small Town or whatever. What she did on her site was put a discount code for 10% off, and the discount code is Aldine, which is the name of that country singer who wrote that very racist song. And it's bringing people joy, right? Like this is just, it's all very joyful what's happening. I'll send you guys this video. There's like a woman who was like in her pool already. This happened just this weekend. Already in her pool, did this whole funny skit about, she was a Black woman teaching Black people how to swim with folding chairs. She uses it, like when you teach kids how to swim, they use those little like float pads.
Yeah.
Like that. And it just is so funny, and people are getting so much joy out of it, and like they're using internet aesthetic to talk about it and to connect with it.
And
It
and
just, yeah,
exactly
really...
what you're describing. You've got the theater, you've got the kind of the symbols getting out of control and taking a life of their own. I mean, that's a great example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a great example. It like I'm, and I'll be honest about this. Like I've been very nervous to share this media with my like non-BIPOC friends. Do you know what I mean? I think Maureen, you accepted because we're like on the same level. But like, as a person of color who lives in North America, Europe, wherever, you can have progressive white friends who are not always going to get it. You know what I mean?
But can you state for the listener what you are worried that people will not get, or how they might misunderstand you?
I mean, it is even like allies don't always work on their internal biases, right? And so this, like, for white people watching like 50 Black folks beat up a group of white folks is going to be triggering. You know what I mean? It's sort of like I post a lot of stuff about Palestine, and this girl who I've known since high school is going around and telling people that I'm posting like anti-Semitic things on social media. And like one of my friends from Australia called me and she was like, "Are you posting anti-Semitic things on Instagram?" And I was like, "No, I don't think so." Like, and I went through and I looked at like what I had been, posting. And it was just all this stuff in solidarity with Palestine. And that is anti-Semitic. And so like, and that's a person who I've known since I was like 12, right? Who is not going to believe what they know about me, but is going to believe a narrative around institutions and government and power and whiteness.
So I want to talk about this for a second. We are definitely out of time, but I still don't want to talk about this. So something that I think is very important to say is that when you do have solidarity and resistance, even if it is being done in an aesthetic way, the structural system, the moment it begins to feel pressure from that, as the moment the system is being asked to change itself, it pushes back, right? That's what they teach you if you study family therapy. The system always preserves itself.
Yeah.
So what happens is then you get people saying you're too loud, you're too vulgar, you're too violent, you're too rowdy. That's not actually aesthetic. Like, so maybe let's talk about that just for a little bit and we can wrap up that way.
Yeah. I mean, kind of going back, I would like to actually take this back to our cohort. We were told we were unserious because we were doing these things, right? We were told we were unserious because we were showing up in similar colors. We were told we were unserious because we were bringing snacks for each other. We were told we were unserious because we spent time like connecting and going out for meals and blah, blah, blah. Like we were not serious academics because serious academics are always in competition with each other.
Mind you, these were people telling us this.
Maureen just fell over in her chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was the height of hypocrisy because it is people who are actually talking about this and working on this in their field sites and, publishing papers and books and whatnot. But I actually lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, I just want to say that Sahil and I had a conversation with Layla yesterday, and we talked about exactly this
Mm.
discrepancy between um, kind of what academics do in the field and what they do,
Mm-hmm.
like their values, a discrepancy in values held and values used. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Huh. And I'm going to let you say Layla's name because I will murder that last name.
Yagiela. Lele Yagiela.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think also it wasn't just about being serious academics, right? It was also like when we did realize like, oh, this is not cool, and we did something, we were literally told, right, that this is not how you conduct yourself.
Mm-hmm. You
The
are bad
system,
children. You are rowdy bad
we were
children.
literally told the system cannot be wrong. Like those were the actual words.
Oh my
There's
goodness.
someone who writes about the system not being right.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is what makes it so funny is anytime I relay this experience and then people are like, where'd you go? And like the punchline basically is I went to SOAS because
Yeah.
all these academics there who publicly would criticize any system that worked that way and then internally uh just support it and bolster it and protect it.
So, so how do we, as people who are part of systems, um, hold space for solidarity and resistance, as well as help push solidarity and resistance forward? How do we do that?
Yeah.
Like for me, I'll say that, I mean, I'm not in any large structure that I, have to deal with this regularly, but I will say that when I'm managing teams, I'm a fighter for my team. I will march into an office and say what I think needs to be said and stand up for my people,
Mm-hmm.
which makes me less liked by the people in charge,
Yeah.
and has gotten me criticism. And I really have learned that anytime somebody tells me that I am being rude, it is always because I have chosen to stand up for people, and they always tell me that I'm being rude, and
Mm-hmm.
I just it as a compliment now. But how do other people do it? What do you guys do, or how do you think about this problem?
Yeah. I mean, I'm coming up against it. I started my own consulting firm about 2 years ago, which Maureen is also a part of. Um, and, you know, I kept coming back to this like idea of being values aligned. And what I'm noticing in working with clients is value is always in the output and never in the process. And that is the problem, right? Like if your values of transparency and honesty and respect and joy and community and blah 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 are only in the outputs, but you are traumatizing and terrorizing and opaque internally with your staff, those outputs never work, right? They don't actually work. That program doesn't work. That development process doesn't work. So I'm actually in the midst right now of shifting how I talk about my firm to be very process oriented,
Mhm.
and about like bringing values to the process. I think one of the biggest things there, and one of the things that like doesn't get enough, I don't know, enough prioritization, especially in the field that I work in like nonprofits and kind of like the adjacent spaces, is really like coaching, leadership coaching, right? Like, how do you be a values aligned leader? And it's hard. It's a hard sell for people, like who's gonna pay money to like listen, to talk to someone about being like values aligned when you already think you're values aligned because your outputs are values aligned. And so I've been doing some of that and being able to pick the projects that I get to do, I feel like helps me personally feel like I'm not part of the system. Not part of the system, but like not actively like feeding into a system, not having my soul being crushed by a system.
Yeah.
um And I feel like that was that was very purposeful. Like I know that I cannot work in a large corporation, institution, anything
Yeah.
like that. That is just like not my way of being. Maureen's like, yes, you would do very badly there.
And I mean, that's part of the reason why I'm where I am too, is I can't, I do much better in small systems and where I can advocate for people and not, I just die in a large corporation.
Oh gosh,
No,
yeah.
that's really that's interesting, right? Because like I was as you guys were talking, I was thinking like, yeah, like so you know, work as a consultant, right, for a very large international like kind of bilateral organization, and I was thinking about like what you were asking, Marina, about how do you bring that in? And I think it's like being able to both see like the systemic like issues and having, I worked in development before doing the PhD as well, and knowing what it's like, working at, in a country office at a like, lower level, knowing what it's like working in, in a kind of DC office or something. And then bringing that to the interactions with each individual. So recognizing, hey, look, I understand that you have a job to do. I have a job to do in the system. And a lot of times nothing is aligned with, actually what, because everything works on like funding cycles and whatever. And even if there's the language around, oh, mental health in the workplace and so forth, and I think like what I think about what was it like for me and how can if I were in, what would I have wanted for someone in my position, say
Mm,
10, 15 years ago? And so in all my interactions, trying to be like just recognizing and saying, look, I see you, I see what is happening here. It's easier for me because I'm a consultant, so I'm not part of the system, but I'm on the outside. I'm like, look, we need to work together to get this thing done. And we need to do it in a way that is actually going to be the easiest for both of us and while recognizing the system needs certain things. And so, sort of just naming that space and saying, this is the contours of the space that don't fit us, and saying, how do we together get through this? And so far, it seems to work, but there, of course, is pushback from individuals within the
mm,
system who see me as like a threat because they don't work that way. I don't know. As a consultant, you can sort of like not think about them too much. I mean, maybe they can like prevent me from getting a contract. I don't know, but but then also like in sort of non-work spaces, like the kind of I co-lead this kind of religious like a community here with another person, and I think that like traditionally like Sufi structures are quite r- hierarchical and rigid, and even though we have a teacher and we have, I think like in our community here, like I sort of aim for it to like to name and say like, look, it's not that I am like more knowledgeable or like enlightened or anything than anyone else. We're all coming here for a purpose, for in terms of like our spiritual growth or like whatever it is, and we're all making the space together. Maybe, yeah, I'm like, if it's on Zoom, like I'm opening the Zoom room and like leading things, or like someone it's in someone's house, but like acknowledging that actually if each and every one of us weren't here at this particular time, this space would not
mm,
be the way that it is. And I think for me it's a lot about naming and just being very honest about what is going on, and like recognizing both the structural issues and the humanity of everyone involved.
Listening to you talk, Sahil, also made me think that another thing that, well, Nyan and I've talked about this a lot, like what I do in my work, what I can do, because I'm not the owner of a big company, you know what I mean?
mm,
But what I can do is talk to like that person to person connection,
mm,
which I think is what we're talking. I mean, that's what this whole podcast is about, that lack of atomization. So bringing people together, but when you can make that person to person connection and then advocate for them, for their betterment, like you're kind of, our voices together are stronger kind of thing.
mhm,
And even though I don't have a lot of power, if I have a bit of power, my bit of power and your bit of power leveraged together makes more power.
mm.
And I think that that's also what's going on and what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is separate, but it strikes me as interesting that we are all consulting and like working on the peripheries of systems. And, that's partially, I'm sure we were all primed to do that. We were all those types of people. But I also wonder how much our experiences in a large system has affected that choice that we've been making now for the last decade in how we want to work.
Yeah.
I know that for myself, like, oh, what happened?
That's your note taker. Your note taker is just
Weird.
occupying it's taking up
It's
space.
taking up space. For myself, I do come back to that PhD time, especially when I'm working with younger people of color. And like I say younger people, but now they're like in their 30s and younger. Like not just straight out of college, like have 10 years of experience under their belt. Anyways, the like who do I want to be in their life? And I think Sahil, you were saying this too, right? Like I don't want to be blank or blank. I won't say any names. I want to be the person that I needed then, and that was a person who like had power and stability, and even if it wasn't the power of like the administration, these were people who had more power than me, who could have advocated, who could have helped, who could have supported. And I that's like a responsibility. That's a responsibility that I think all of us take very seriously.
Yeah, I think we're all nodding our heads. Like,
Mm.
I think we're all making that choice to not do things the way that we have seen them be done.
Yeah. Yep.
It'd also be open to, I think, and I think this is true for all of us, also be open to when people say, hey, this was not cool, because that's also something we didn't get. And
Yeah.
I know individually each of us has like this experience of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's very true. And I feel like that was a big thing. I mean, I know everyone finds it difficult to take criticism, but I feel like I really, really struggled learning how to take criticism or taking like gentle pushback or feedback. And it was something that I like really, really, really had to train myself to do. But my work, my personal relationships, my ability to support others has gotten so much better because of it.
So from my perspective, what we talked about, I mean, this was great. I didn't expect the conversation to go like this. Like we started out talking about our cohort, talking about our imaginations, talking about how silly we all were, how much fun we had despite being in the depths of depression. And then we kind of showed our analytical skills. Like we showed ourselves as anthropologists, like how this experience has allowed us to see what other people are doing around us in the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
And then how we bring it back into our personal lives or our working lives or our religious lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I saw
it. Is that what our wrap up is? Like we're talking about our takeaways here?
Well, it doesn't.
I'm genuinely just asking. I'm not sorry. I'm not like I'm not saying that
would be a good way to wrap it up is to talk about our takeaways, but we don't.
I like it. No, I like it. I just wanted to make sure. Sorry, I did take cold medicine a while ago.
Blanket looks like a jacket now. Look at it. Look how cool it looks.
It does look like a cool jacket, especially with the Levi's on the t-shirt. It looks.
He kind of looks Ken enough.
Oh my gosh! I didn't even wear my bracelet that says I'm Knuff. Takeaways. Sorry,
Wait, are we doing takeaways, or are we like, or maybe Maureen just needs to be like, all right, well, class, time to wrap up, and what are you gonna leave us with? I don't know, because I thought what you said, Maureen, was really good.
I think what you said is really good.
Takeaway, and then we can do whatever Nayantara wants to say, and whatever you want to say.
I was just gonna say, like, I'd always been a creative person. Like, I went to film school prior to all of this, but I think creativity as a way of just like being in the world and as a force for action in whatever way that needs to happen was not something that I think I fully understood until our experience at SOAS. I think like I became a lot more imaginative in my everyday and a lot more playful and a lot more joyful And it's something I carry with me. I think the last few years have also been like a little bit of digging deep into that. And like, I don't buy basics. You know what I mean? Like, there was a time where it's like, you got to buy your basics and then a couple of fun pieces around that. And I have none of those anymore because, like, why the fuck would I do that when I could just wear like fun colors and be like kind of weird looking all the time that in a way that like makes me happy. So it's like it is helpful. You know what I mean? Like I feel like now I go into that internal well as a place of strength, right? It is a way to be strong. When I was going through my divorce, I like did all this designing stuff and actually might monetize that, but that's a whole other thing. I was writing like I I did, yeah, like just this idea of like being creative and joyful and imaginative and playful as a way of being in the world. It's like very freeing, it's very liberating, and it's very, I don't know what the word is. It
It's more
gives me
fun.
strength. That is true.
Yeah.
It is more fun, but it like gives me strength. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I appreciate the whole experience of being with you, being in community with you guys and the cohort for that, and maybe
That's
sort of so as well.
that's really interesting because I was like, what does she mean basics? I don't think I've ever owned basics.
That's true, Sahil. You have never owned a basic. I remember how I used to dress at SOAS. Like it would be like like a plain top with a cardigan, and then like jeans.
Oh yeah, because the first time I saw you in a dress, I was like, "Who are you?" And then you were like, "Oh, I like color and dresses," and I was like, "What? I never
See,
knew
like
this about
for some
you."
reason, that's what I have in mind when I think of you. I think of all those dresses, not your basics. But
That's how I started out. If you look at earlier pictures of like first year at SOAS, it's like a brown
Yeah.
cardigan and a black t-shirt and jeans. And
uh,
maybe like one funky piece of jewelry.
see, like I remember, like I think part of the reason why we also chose purple was because so many times I would just show up in
Your
like
purple pants.
I would have a purple pants with a purple hoodie. And like, and my watch was purple, and you were like, "Why are you dressed like Grimace?" It's like, and I had no idea because I was just wearing whatever thrown on. But like I remember like actually like this was I mean before SOAS like I just needed to have color in my life because I lived in the UK for 1 year and I was like all my clothes were just like a rainbow. But
That'd be it.
I, I was just wearing, well, when I first got there, I thought, because I was coming out of a music program and we were supposed to dress professionally.
Mm.
So I showed up my first day in like dress pants and a blouse. And then I was like, well, if this is hippie central. Why am I this? And so I, switched to jeans and my Ohio t-shirts because I
Aw.
needed people to know that I really just wished I was in Ohio and I didn't think I was that cool.
I think I showed up on my first day because I remember seeing a picture. I think I was wearing like bright green jeans.
Yes, you were.
I remember
Yeah,
those jeans too.
and
I
like
have no idea what I wore that first day.
yeah. But
We're
what
Sorry?
was that?
off topic.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Well, maybe it does this too.
Okay, I'm gonna be quick with my takeaways because I think that yeah, talking about all of this stuff like it's made me think, you know, for me, I think I went into the PhD not really I've always advocated for myself,
Mhm.
but and fought when I needed to, but sort of always been very concerned about will this like do anything? Will this And I think just that, just the process of us coming together and knowing that like we have each other's back. I don't know. I think like that's really how it's affected my approach to systems, which is that okay, a system is ultimately just people,
Mm,
and if
yeah.
we can get everyone to have each other's back, we might not win, but yeah.
You know what Dr. Mazza said
What?
when I was telling her everything that we did?
Mm-hmm.
about the colors and Zubrovka and all this, she laughed, she cackled in her witchy way, and said, "Oh, you Bolsheviks, you will never conquer the British."
All right, thank you for joining us on this accidental episode of the SORAPod. If you want to hear more, see some of the media that we have up on the website, like our abstracts, some photos, etc., you can check out SORAPod, SORAPod.com. There's information on where to listen, how to get in touch, etc. And you can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you get podcasts. You know this, you're listening to us, you know what to do. And yeah, we'll see you quite soon for the next episode of SORAPod.